Welcome to the S16 podcast, where through conversations with remarkable founders and advisors, we explore different forms of advising as a way for a startup to cut corners and ultimately beat the odds. This is an AI-generated podcast based on edited conversations that can be found on s16vc.com/advising. Join us in exploring the potential of AI-driven content creation.
What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me no more. What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me no more.
I'm Aleks, and today we have a special guest, Elena Verna. She's a B2B SaaS product-led growth advisor to companies such as Miro, Amplitude, MongoDB, and many others. Elena is here to talk about how to leverage advising for the growth of your company. It's great to have you on the podcast, Elena.
Thank you for having me.
I think advising is a very complex topic. For the purpose of this conversation, let's try to cover it broadly and dive deeper into specific topics. Here's one to start with. What the heck is advising?
Before we delve into advising, I would like to step back and first describe the different types of employment engagement you can have with a company. Doing so can help put advising contextually across different modes of employment. So first, we have a traditional full-time role. In a full-time role, you have full accountability for the deliverables and you have a kitchen sink of responsibilities with the company. The expectation of retention is almost in perpetuity unless some event causes an exit. Although there is usually a specialty that you are hired for, as the role evolves, you take on whatever area the company needs help with. If there's too great a separation between your abilities and what the company requires, you may choose to terminate your employment and seek other opportunities. The alternative to full-time is interim, a full-time employment with a short-term expectation for your tenure. Fractional is a part-time role but with a perpetual expectation. If at an individual contributor level they call you a part-time employee, at the leadership level, it is called fractional. Fractional is when you commit to 2 to 3 days a week to a company. The time expectation is also infinite, and it is a long-term contract without an end date, but you have a commitment to the job of less than 40 hours per week. Contractual employment is project-based, meaning there is a specific project to be completed. There's still accountability, and it falls across all of the modes of engagement I've described so far. Time expectations are usually balanced with the project commitment as part of the contract. Finally, advising. Here we remove the accountability deliverable. Advising involves coaching creation and execution of the strategy. So there's no such thing as advising very early on in IC level tracks because you may not have the skills to coach others since you are likely still learning the work yourself. However, as you move into leadership level roles, you start learning how not only to execute, but also to coach those around you on how to execute. As you work on your succession plan, your job becomes to lead, train, and teach the team you hired rather than doing everything yourself.
Wow, that's a lot of information. Let's zoom in on a few topics here. First, you mentioned different types of employment, such as traditional full-time, interim, fractional, contractual employment, and advising. I think on the other side of the matrix, there are different approaches to advising, including coaching, mentorship, and consulting. What are your thoughts on these?
As an advisor, I have no player mode. I don't do any of the work myself. My role is to advise a company about what I believe they should do or to push them to develop a new strategy if their existing approach is flawed. The main difference between an advisor and a leader with full accountability is that, as an advisor, I cannot make the final decision.
That definitely makes sense. One definition I heard that stuck with me is that in coaching, you essentially ask questions. You don't teach anything. Rather, you ask people questions that provoke thinking. In mentorship, you teach your ways and approaches, but still don't give precise instructions on performing a task. Conversely, consulting involves telling people precisely what to do, and even doing it for them sometimes. Given this framework, which approach do you think is most appropriate for someone who doesn't have full accountability for the outcome?
To me, advising is an umbrella of modes that you switch between depending on the situation. I coach by asking questions that help the team think about the problem correctly, consult by providing guidance on what approach to take, and mentor by sharing my experiences and approaches. I believe that advising involves not only identifying problems or developing strategies, but also helping people execute and operationalize solutions. Frameworks and questions are, in a sense, cheap. The hard part about being a successful advisor is getting in the details and coming up with a solution unique to a company's specific situation, helping adjust it along the way, and shortcutting the way to success.
Have you noticed any changes in the popularity and sentiment towards advising over the past few years, or even longer? The reason I ask is because we are looking for a successful founder to interview about their journey. We have spoken to 5 or 6 founders who started their companies 10 plus years ago, and almost all of them said they did not have any advisors. Perhaps it wasn't as popular back then? What kind of evolution in sentiment around advising have you seen?
I have a very biased view because I don't see the other side. My inbox is filled with companies wanting to talk to me. I receive 5 to 10 pings a day from different companies interested to engage, so my pipeline is very healthy. However, this is also due to my investment in building my brand and putting out a lot of content. People see what they don't have inside their own company and think, how can I get a piece of that? In reality, what are their options? Hire a person and hope they figure things out? Or hire someone who has already been there and done that? The problem is, the people who have been successful and have done it repeatedly may eventually find it repetitive. This is because the core problems within a specific industry are so similar in every single company. It's mind-boggling once you start seeing the patterns. For a lot of people, advising is an alternative way to build their career and to scale themselves, to help the industry as a whole. I feel good knowing that I'm not just helping one company, but instead hundreds of companies through my content, which I release through the freemium model and through monetized advising. I hope to make a big impact on the industry as a whole. That was my evolution as an operator. I felt like I couldn't do the same thing repeatedly, especially if I focused on a very specific stage in companies to deepen my expertise. However, now that platforms like LinkedIn and Reforge are coming out, founders can access the knowledge that was previously inaccessible. This is shifting the way people think about what they have within their company. They realize that it's impossible to hire for that knowledge at a full-time level because it's too specialized, too expensive, or just impossible to bring in. Instead, they can take a piece of that knowledge. If you could have somebody's brain for 1 hour a week or 0 hours a week, what would you prefer? Now, the question is what that brain can bring you and how it can make you better. I feel like this ungating of knowledge is driving the trend of wanting to have more diverse opinions at the table because it will make us better.
It definitely makes sense to me and to the whole S16 team that advising can change the trajectory of companies. That's why we are trying to promote advising among our portfolio companies and beyond through thought leadership. Of course, the Miro example is a big motivator.
I remember Andre approaching me after my keynote at a growth marketing conference in San Francisco, saying he loved what I presented and asking for help. He recognized that he didn't know everything and sought out people to teach him. It's a founder's mindset. Do you have a growth mindset and use advisors as shortcuts to grow? Or do you have a fixed mindset and assume you know everything? I think the growth mindset is what drives founders towards advisors to avoid making avoidable mistakes. You still might make mistakes, but you'll make fewer or catch them sooner before feeling the impact on the entire company.
How did you get into advising?
I did not go into advisory work to become an advisor. After I exited my last full-time position, I did not know how to interview for leadership level roles as I only had one data point in the past. In my first job, I grew for 8 years. After that, I picked the company incorrectly because I didn't know what to ask and watch out for. Everything was rainbows and unicorns. So I just jumped off the cliff, and then I realized that it was not a good fit. As a result, when searching for my next job, I wanted to reduce the risk of a bad match and increase my chances of long-term retention with the company. Recruiting is very heavily optimized for acquisition, not retention. Both company and candidate aggressively sell to each other. In this selling mode, there is very little truth being told about actual problems on either side. The focus is on closing and signing a contract. To me, success would be staying with the company over 5 years, not signing a shiny new deal with the biggest salary. I couldn't figure out how to get through that bullshit of unicorns being thrown at you. Everything is great, we're unicorns, we're a hyper-growth company. We just need you to come in and everything is going to be incredible. But they won't tell you about the actual issues and cockroaches in the closet that you'll need to address. I thought of advising as a product-led growth strategy. Try before you buy. What if I don't have to sign on the dotted line? Instead, I can have a certain level of engagement with the company to see what's actually going on. get past that honeymoon phase, and then have a conversation about whether I'm the right match for them and vice versa. In the meantime, I also thought this would be a really great opportunity for me to get exposed to more companies. I could learn more about different teams, industries, and company sizes, and make a more informed decision for myself. This is especially important because a short-term tenure can be penalized when viewed in the context of a full-time role. It can give the impression that you are not able to interview or scale with the company correctly. So I decided to collect more patterns to make a better full-time decision. This is how my journey as an advisor began. Then I started to enjoy identifying patterns not just in different company sizes and cultures, but also in how businesses do growth. For me, that was an unlock. I could either put all my eggs in one basket and deeply learn how a certain company does growth, or sample across 10 companies, run a large-scale multivariate experiment on everything I tried to get them to do, and then see how it plays out, separating data points from patterns or one-offs from actual frameworks. I found this path very fascinating, and I committed to it after about 6 months of doing it.
That's a cool story. It's a very analytical and pragmatic approach. I think it also makes sense for companies, right? It seems logical for founders to hire advisors first. In fact, why wouldn't this become a standard way of hiring senior people?
I hope so. Founders may be not satisfied with this approach if they need someone to fill that role. I appreciate that advising may be hard to commit to, but there are two important points to consider. Number one is the amount of time it takes to find the right person that exactly meets your specific requirements. On average, it takes 6-12 months to hire a leader, at a minimum. Alternatively, you can relax your requirements and hire someone more quickly, without being too specific about industry, stage, or tenure, and attach an advisor to them right away. This way, you can hit the ground running much faster. So it's a shortcut. You can go to any leader, say the president at HubSpot, and ask them to become your advisor. But can you realistically recruit a president at HubSpot? So why not hire someone who fits 60% to 70% of your job specification, and then hire a president at HubSpot as an advisor to that person? That's a shortcut to getting the best of both worlds. You get the brain of the person you believe has the right patterns, and then you get someone on the ground to execute for you.
So that's one really great shortcut. I also believe that more leadership hiring should start with interim contracts. For example, a 1-year contract with the possibility of converting to a full-time role.
This is a true test of a right match, and it has less consequences if it's a bad match, because many leadership hires are a bad match due to incorrect information presented at the time of hiring. At least at this point, you have an exit date for that person. When you do offer them a full-time position, you can be 100% sure that it's the right match for you. However, there is a lot of anxiety from employees who want the security of a full-time contract, as well as from companies that want a false sense of security that they have the right person for the job. I think it's important to recognize that there is more liquidity in finding matches, not just through the contract sign, but through these try-before-you-buy scenarios. The better we are at doing this, the better off we'll be as an industry. Although there may be some initial discomfort, I hope that it will start to dissipate soon.
Since we're on the topic, I want to ask a question that bothers founders the most: accountability. Nassim Taleb warns against taking advice from people who don't have skin in the game. You mentioned that advisors are not directly accountable for outcomes, and being an advisor removes the penalty for short-term employment, at least as perceived by future potential employers. With that in mind, how can you ensure that the advisor has skin in the game?
There are three components in the accountability equation. The first is compensation. Giving equity as part of the compensation, or asking advisors to angel invest, is a great way to ensure that the advisor has skin in the game. The second is the tenure of the agreement. I prefer a minimum of 6 months and ideally a full year, as this allows me to see the impact of my advice over time. If I only advise you for 3 months, I feel like I have failed to properly screen you. However, I also believe in flexible termination, so if it's not working out for either party, there should be a quick exit with a 7-day notice. The third component is the most important to me: the advisor's impact on the team. If I'm not actually helping to amplify your team and make them more empowered to succeed, then I'm not doing my job. My North Star metric in advising is insights per minute that I deliver, whether it's through insightful questions, pattern recognition, or identifying potential paths forward. I want to deliver as much value as possible in each session. My goal is for my clients to find our meetings to be the most mind-blowing and insight-packed sessions they have in an entire week. If I'm not meeting that goal, then I need to reevaluate my approach. Ultimately, my aspiration is to get to the point where I'm part of the board deck, as this would be a clear indication that I've made a significant impact on the direction of the company.
Yeah, I love that North Star metric and the goal to make it to the board deck. As for compensation packages, there is an infinite continuum of possibilities. However, if a founder aims for an ideal setup, what should the ratio between equity and cash be?
This will depend heavily on the time commitment. It's important to strike the right balance between having skin in the game and ensuring that the advisor receives a reasonable amount of cash compensation. I believe that a 50-50 split between cash and equity is a good benchmark for compensation. An advisor will have an hourly rate that they're shooting towards, so you can take that rate and break it in half. However, the exact percentage can vary depending on the situation. For example, with Company A, I received 25% cash and 75% equity, while with Company B, I received 100% equity. For companies like Company C that are already public, I received 100% cash as it made more sense for me to purchase equity on the public market. In general, to me, it's a sliding scale. I take more equity earlier in the startup stage and more cash later on. However, this is not a strict framework and depends on the advisor's preference. I would never advise accepting cash-only compensation. The percentage of cash can vary depending on the situation. For instance, with I received cash for the first 3 months because their equity situation was complicated, and we agreed to convert it to equity after that. Every scenario is different, and some companies may not be able to issue equity at all, depending on their capital setup.
So, cash only is definitely a red flag, right? That's what you said, correct?
For me, it's a red flag in the long term. If it's just for the first 3 months to get started, then it's fine. But if it's a private company that only wants me to pay cash in the long term, then it seems like they're just burning cash. Why aren't they incentivizing me based on long-term outcomes at all?
Yeah, I'm thinking more from the perspective of the founder. If their advisor is insisting on cash only, then that should be a red flag, right?
I think so. There are potentially outliers to that equation. But if you're a founder of a public company or a near public event founder, it might be easier to just pay out in cash.
Let's say I'm a founder and I'm looking at the LinkedIn profile of a potential advisor or someone who's been highly recommended. That advisor looks very successful on LinkedIn, has advised many amazing companies, and so on. Then that advisor comes in and says their usual compensation structure is 50% equity and 50% cash. And I think, why would you need this petty cash that I can offer when I'm a young company about to become a unicorn? Shouldn't you just wish for equity only? Is that a reasonable train of thought?
There are many nuances to consider when deciding between cash and equity as a founder, such as how much equity to give in the first place versus how much cash they have. Sometimes a founder has a lot of cash and would rather give out cash than equity, while other times they have no cash and would rather give out equity. These terms are negotiable for an advisor. For example, I advised Company B for almost a year and a half, and even though they were a profitable company, they asked me to do it only for equity, and I was fine with that. I think those terms are negotiable. So, even if an advisor asks for a 50-50 split, you can counter with something like 1090 or even 100% equity. There's a lot of room for negotiation with every single company. As an advisor, I assess each company and evaluate the risk of the equity. If it's very early on, there's more risk. Sometimes I just want to cover my time spent at the minimum with you because I might not ever see a dime from that equity. Other times, I'm not sure about your equity's upside because a company is super overvalued. In that case, I will push for some sort of cash coverage because your equity does not translate one-to-one to my ask anymore. I also try to balance my ability to retrieve anything back out of that equity, as not everything is going to be 100%. With dilution, especially if you get very early stage equity, you might end up with very little at the end of the day.
As a founder, setting aside the company's preferences, would an advisor asking for 100% equity as desired compensation be a wrong signal? Or is it always an amazing signal that the advisor truly believes in the company?
It could signal that the advisor is uneducated about how equity works. Additionally, many people who advise on the side of their full-time job take equity only because they don't need to draw any cash out of business. If someone is advising only as a side hustle to their full-time job, it's expected that they will only take equity. However, if someone is a full-time advisor, you should expect to pay them more cash than equity, unless that advisor is already financially independent. In that case, they may retire or do advising as a hobby.
By the way, I once had an advisor who had a full-time job and was not allowed to have a second source of income. Therefore, he was obligated to only take equity.
That's fascinating. I think any employee needs to be careful and negotiate this clause in their contract because it can usually be removed from 99.9% of contracts with the employer. However, it can be difficult to amend the contract after it's signed. So, employees should be careful when signing a contract with the employer, but you're absolutely right. This is very prevalent in Europe.
To wrap up the compensation discussion, let's talk about how both parties can protect themselves against a poor match.
I guess a cliff is pretty typical. I always ask for monthly best. Here's my side of it. Imagine I'm equity only, and you have a 3-month cliff, and then you fire me 2 months and 3 weeks into it. I just spent 3 months with you, which, by the way, are much more intensive for me because I have to onboard and learn everything, and you paid me nothing. I appreciate that we might not have been a good match, but I still want to be compensated for the time spent. However, I also never sign an advisory agreement after a 25-minute conversation. I have at least 1 or 2, maybe even 3 sessions for free with a potential client. Recently, I've started scaling it even better with workshops. I have an hour-and-a-half workshop on the subject that I will be advising them on so I can offload all of my frameworks to you right away. I show what I would be preaching so that you can decide if you want me to preach. I don't try to convert you, I only preach to the converted, and that workshop is completely free. If we're exploring an advisory relationship, this approach reduces the risk of you needing to fire me because it puts us in the working situation up front and gets some of those question marks out of the way. I have never been fired, but I have fired many clients because I felt they were not getting enough value. We're not calibrated in the perceived value to the price, so sometimes there is a disconnect. In those cases, I would ask the client to pause and come back in 6 months to either catch up or decide to discontinue. But those are failure points for me, and I'm constantly learning how to optimize against them.
How long does it typically take you to realize that a relationship is not working out?
It usually takes about 3 months. However, that doesn't mean that the relationship wasn't working the entire time. In the beginning, things might be very hot and heavy, but then a backlog starts to build up and there aren't enough resources to catch up to it. So I might realize that there's already a backlog buildup for the next 6 months. At that point, I think it's best to stop because there's very little benefit to us continuing while the company is resource constrained.
Okay, cool. To protect a company's interest, founders often want to give out equity, especially early stage companies, because they want an advisor with significant skin in the game. However, they are also mostly sensitive about equity. To protect against a poor match, one way is to have a compensation package that includes a certain combination of equity and cash with a cliff of 3 months. After 3 months, if the relationship doesn't work out, the entire equity is converted into 100% cash.
Sure, that sounds great. If there's a cliff, I would 100% agree to it. Alternatively, a monthly vesting schedule could be used. Either scenario is fine for me. Monthly vesting may be more preferable for the advisor, while having a 3-month cliff and an option to convert to cash may be more preferable for the company. I haven't had any contracts with these terms before, but I'm open to trying it out. Interestingly, I haven't had any pushback on the monthly vesting schedule. I don't care about owning tiny portions of companies. I'd rather see it through. With equity, I want to ensure that I have some control over it, at least in some capacity, that I've contributed to it. In 3 months, I don't believe I can contribute much to the equity. If you want to buy me out, you can buy me out. There's very little impact I can have in 3 months.
Sounds like this is an ideal format.
Yes, I'll try it out.
Did you have an advisor when you were employed?
My boss hired an advisor for me from Facebook who was on the original growth team. It was productive because we didn't really click since I didn't select him and he was just pushed on me. It was a really bizarre situation and not a good fit. When I joined Reforge, I had access to a network of other operators at my level or higher who provided additional data points and acted as my advisory network. While growing up to the VP level, I didn't have formal advising relationships, but I had this network in Reforge that I could ask any question and they would give me insightful answers. This network shortened my path to success, and I attribute much of my success to it. I had a unique first mover's advantage because I was part of the initial circle at Reforge that formed the company, which is very hard to do now. However, I drew from others like Casey Winters, whom I could ping for advice anytime. Even if I didn't agree with his answer, I had additional data points from him and how Pinterest thought about the same issue. That was incredibly valuable.
100%. That's great that you brought this up because that's exactly what I wanted to ask next. There are different forms of advising besides formal modes, such as seeking advice from your parents, friends, or a community you're a part of. If possible, you can also get advice and mentorship from your board. You can also schedule advisory calls or sessions with different people. So the question is, how do these different forms of advice compare? For example, having a committed formal growth advisor versus having a couple of calls per week with different people to brainstorm different issues and get new ideas flowing.
If you're really good at connecting theory to practice, you can extract value from random 1-hour calls and do without a formal advisor. It's a big mental exercise to marry all of those different pieces of advice. In contrast, a formal advisor knows the context in detail and offers advice local to your business. When it comes to hiring advisors for your team, when I served as interim CMO at Miro, I hired 3 advisors for my team. I recognized my limitations in certain areas, such as content strategy, and sought out experts to advise my team members. For example, I hired Kieran, who had experience running content at HubSpot, as an advisor to my head of content. By doing so, I ensured that my team had access to valuable expertise, and I learned from Kieran's advice as well. Similarly, I hired Naaman, who had been VP of Enterprise Marketing at Dropbox, to advise my enterprise lead. This is a superpower that allowed me to scale in areas where I lacked subject matter expertise, and I gave my team members the means to become better leaders themselves. Regarding hiring advisors for myself, I prefer to focus on learning materials such as Reforge courses. I also rely on my network to translate advice and insights into actionable steps. However, for my team members, I believe hiring advisors can be an effective way to access expertise and help them grow in their roles.
That's a great example of the additional, non-straightforward value that advisors bring. That has also been my experience. I had advisors who would bring in more advisors for ad hoc conversations or formal advisors, and that has worked out great for me actually. However, in other cases, it may be more appropriate to have 5 to 10 ad hoc conversations before engaging with a full-time formal advisor. By full-time, I mean 1 hour a week.
Well, I believe that starting with conversations with experts in different areas to identify the specific expertise you need to bring in-house is a must. Having these initial 10 ad hoc conversations can help you calibrate your search. Sometimes these conversations can lead to a recommendation for the advisor you'll end up working with. Other times, they simply help you identify the type of person you need to solve a particular problem or challenge. I personally have many exploratory conversations and am always eager to refer the company to someone else if I see a better fit. When it comes to marketing, there are 3 major specializations: growth marketing, product marketing, and brand marketing. Simply saying I need marketing advice is not specific enough. Do you need growth marketing expertise? Or do you need brand marketing expertise because your head of marketing is more on the growth side and not on the brand side? For example, Kirilu from Atlassian offers high-level marketing advice on team structure, budgets, and P&L. It's also important to consider how well expertise from different areas can transfer to your business, and whether the advice is for you or for your team. So it's crucial to recognize how high-level or specific you need the advice to be, and to be aware of your boundaries.
It almost feels like there should be a specific type of advisor who helps you identify the kind of advisor you need. When you're in the early stages and you found product market fit or see signals of it, and you've been doing all the work yourself with your early employees and co-founders, you might think, okay, I got it. Now I need to build marketing. Where do I start? Who do I need? Are you the kind of person who can holistically assess your business and industry and say, okay, you need Elena for this and Korilu for that?
Totally. The beauty of talking to both me and Kirilu is that you can get different past examples of how we saw the marketing function started. Even if you're not going to hire an advisor, it gives you additional data points to make a better decision. All decisions are based on having the right data points, and the more data points you can gather, the better pattern you can recognize to make the right choice for yourself. Many people are willing to give you 15 to 20 minutes and just share their stories. People love to talk about themselves, and it's a fantastic free strategy to augment your data set and make the right call.
If you had to give practical advice to companies at this stage, who should they reach out to first?
They should reach out to a company that they think has synergies with their own, not direct competitors, and find the leader of that function or business unit. Many leaders will be willing to spend an hour advising them, or even act as a formal advisor if asked. Founders often struggle to form these advising relationships because they feel they should only hire full-time employees, But there is a middle ground where you can benefit from the expertise of industry leaders without hiring them full time. At Miro, we had advisors from Atlassian, Dropbox, and HubSpot who helped with our team and marketing strategy, and it was a superpower. We could not afford to hire those people, but we had access to their expertise to help guide us. If you don't see that as your superpower, you'll be left to figure things out on your own and risk repeating history's mistakes.
If you were to start a company today, what kind of advisors would you bring on board at the inception?
Well, if I were starting a company, I would be cautious about seeking advice on product market fit. If it was possible to find product market fit by pattern matching, everybody would be able to get there. I'm skeptical of product market fit advisors because that's art, not science. It requires a deep understanding of the customer and the problem, which cannot be shortcut. As the company scales, advisors become more valuable in helping to create sustainable and predictable distribution, as well as scaling teams across product, engineering, marketing, growth, and design. At this point, it becomes more pattern matchy and scientific in terms of discovering what works, as opposed to product market fit, which is more like an art of understanding the problem and finding the right solution.
So would you advise having nothing more than ad hoc conversations before the founders find product market fit? Because at this stage, processes and structure don't matter, right? All that matters is product market fit, and you can't really hire advisors for product market fit.
I don't have enough examples because I only work post-product market fit, so I can't say with certainty, but my gut feeling is no. I don't think there are any shortcuts to finding product market fit, and it's ultimately the founder's responsibility. After all, that's the whole point of founding a company.
Got it. Elena, thank you very much. I appreciate your transparency in the way you unpack every question. I think the density of insights is quite thick, and there is a lot of value in this conversation.
Yeah, let me know if you need to dig into any other specific topics or if you need to elaborate on certain questions. Happy to do that as well.
Sure, yeah, that'd be cool. I'd definitely love to do part two, but I think part one is valuable enough to be published on its own. At least I feel so. Let's see how it is received.